This program was made possible in part by the Jacob and Jenny L. Lichter Fund of the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati and the Procter & Gamble Fund, with additional funding by Friends of the Combined Generations of the Holocaust of Greater Cincinnati.
She never sat on Grandpa Eli's lap. She never baked challah with Grandma Razel. She never heard her cousin Miriam play Chopin on the piano. She never walked through the autumn leaves with Uncle Benjamin. She never knew why, until today. These are the faces of survivors. One by one, they came to Cincinnati to begin living again. They were survivors, having lived through a horrific hell that as yet had no name, a time when all the world had gone mad, a time when the fire of hate consumed the only lives they'd ever known or loved, leaving only despair, desperately shattered souls, and a single, still unanswerable question: why? They are survivors, and more. They bear witness to the worst human catastrophe ever recorded in modern history. Today, it has a name: the Holocaust. A ruthless campaign of systematic repression against the Jews of Germany began in 1933, when Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of a new Germany.
Die Jugend ist uns verschrieben und befallen mit Leibesfeld.
He declared his Nazi party as the only legal political party in the land and asserted the superiority of the so-called Aryan race. The Jews, he said, were completely responsible for the economic and social woes that persisted in Germany following the country's military defeat in World War I. Hitler soon called for Germany's conquest of Europe, and soon thereafter, for the total destruction of Jews in the countries he would soon occupy. This orchestrated annihilation even had a name: the final solution.
The anti-Jewish laws began already in the middle 30s. Hungary was basically a very anti-Semitic country. In fact, some of it seemed to us almost natural. In other words, a basic amount of hate seemed to have been pervasive there. But we didn't feel it because we kept to ourselves, at least in the small village in which I grew up.
It was primarily the younger generation that got on the bandwagon. And at that point, some of my classmates, for instance, were openly anti-Semitic, and on occasion there was some physical punishment. They would beat me up.
And walking to school, we would pass a restaurant, a parking lot, a playground, a park, a movie house, and all these places would have signs on: Jews and dogs prohibited, Jews not allowed, Jews stay out.
Things started to happen very quickly. There was overt anti-Semitism and at the university, at the Polytechnic. There was numerous clauses at that point, Jewish students were beaten, there were Jewish students killed.
The Jewish community of Cincinnati responded quickly to news of the escalating Nazi threat in Europe. Hebrew Union College arranged to receive several German Jewish scholars and rabbinic students. The Jewish Welfare Fund raised more money than ever before. And though the Cincinnati Committee for Refugees was created to assist Jewish families seeking to leave Nazi Germany, some Cincinnati Jews worried about what impact a sudden influx of German Jews would have on the local community, given that the country was still in the throes of a depression, and at the same time the growing pro-Nazi movement in America was also becoming evident in Cincinnati. Some local Jewish leaders were concerned about any additional reprisals the Jews of Germany would suffer should the community organize a public protest against the very vocal Friends of New Germany. But in Nazi Germany, Hitler's implementation of the persecution of German Jews was proceeding without mercy. On November 9th and 10th of 1938, anti-Jewish violence openly erupted in Germany and Austria. On this pogrom night, this night of broken glass, which the Nazis called Kristallnacht, the Nazis burned hundreds of synagogues and vandalized thousands of Jewish-owned stores. At least 91 Jews were killed, and 30,000 more were arrested.
When Kristallnacht came, being 13 years old, we were already half numb. Then the eve of Kristallnacht, we didn't know anything about it, but then the next day, the parents telling, this guy was arrested, this guy was arrested, and what happened to the synagogue. And then going later in the day to the synagogue, seeing destruction inside and the Torah scrolls being torn up. And it's a terrible feeling. What even is more terrible is that the Germans were onlookers. And the Germans saw what happened. And there was not a soul, including the police department, who would stop it. That was even more destructive than just seeing the destruction by itself. And I come to the conclusion that from the first day of 1933, always the Germans knew exactly to know how much in order not to know anymore. With the new edict coming out that all Jews had to wear the Jewish star going onto the street, we heard rumor that Jews in Berlin were rounded up and sent to Eastern Europe, destination unknown.
In 1939, the Germans started throwing out Jews who were not born in Germany, and therefore they threw out one of my aunts and her husband, and they came to live with us. So we knew that things were getting worse all over Germany, to the point that my mother was very conscious of it, and she wanted to leave Poland. It was my father who kept saying, well, it will take me 5 years to liquidate my business, and my mother would say, well, why don't you start today? And of course it never happened. So when the war broke out in 1939, we were stuck, literally stuck.
People were talking all the time, and of course there were Germans in the street. When you saw them, you knew something was wrong. And then about 1940, I think, they formed a big ghetto, which they divided the city, and they gave the Jews, I would say, the 1/3 of the city, the shabbier part, and they transferred all the Jews to this part of the city, and all the Gentiles stayed out, and you were not allowed out of the ghetto. You were in the ghetto, and it was closed with barbed wire.
You got the feeling that it cannot be a permanent arrangement, that this is somehow a prelude for something. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with a young man, and I remember him asking me, do you think they're going to kill us? I heard that there are gas chambers and they will kill us. And I said to him, I can believe that, yes. But you know, I don't know if I really did or not. I think that we all lived in that kind of with a split mind. You knew it and you didn't know it at the same time. It was something that we had plenty of evidence for, because people were disappearing.
Later on, rumors started that there are camps, that there are gas chambers. There was a camp not too far from Poland by the name of Belzec, and there were some people who escaped and came back and told stories. Of course, we did not believe it. Nobody could believe that it can be true.
What probably remains mostly in my mind, some events that were very, very devastating and very painful was one what we called the Great Action, which quote unquote, and that is where we were all forced onto a field, and there were the Germans were standing there, and we were forced to march in one lane by a family at a time. And one went right and one went left, and nobody knew which was the good side, which was the bad side. And but we sort of got the idea after a while, because you could see that the older people with small children and those were lame and didn't look healthy were going to the right, and those that looked a little better and didn't have any small children and weren't old were going to the left. And by the end of the day, approximately 10,000 had gone to the right, and only about maybe 12,000 were left on the other side. And these 12,000 were taken over on the other side of the outside of the fence, and were held there overnight. And approximately 14 members of my family were on the other side. And one of my uncles escaped from there because he knew that he kind of felt that it was the best place to be. And he escaped and came back and told the stories of what was happening there. But the next morning they started marching them up in the hill towards a place called the 9th Fort. And we up, and the following entire 3 days we could hear, it wasn't that far away, the entire days we could hear the we could hear the sounds of gunfire, machine gun fire going on constantly. And nobody talked about, we knew what was happening to those people, but you know, the picture in my mind and in most people's mind was that the picture that they were up marching up the hill, and there was a large graves they were marching towards, and the other side, the Germans, Lithuanians, and Ukrainians were sitting with machine guns and killing them as they were falling into the graves. But if you really think about it, the machine guns were mostly aimed at the chests of grown-up people. The children that were being led by their hands were very small, and most of them fell into the graves alive and were buried alive. Later on, we heard from people who witnessed this. They could hear the cries and the pains of the people for days on, and that was one of the most painful moments of my life, because I remember very clearly, even though as young as I was, and I can still hear the machine guns going in my head. And my mother, I remember, she sat down, and I wouldn't speak and wouldn't eat and wouldn't talk and would do nothing, wouldn't sleep for several days. She would do nothing, and because of the shock, because her father and her sisters and the brother and nieces and other relatives were in that group. And one day she just cried. She got up. She got up and said that they didn't kill anyone, she said. You couldn't, because she said they were shooting over their heads just to scare us, so we stayed online. That's how she coped with the loss. Less than 2 years later, she herself was died in Auschwitz.
I do understand the mothers that went after the children, that went into the wagons and went to get killed with the children. And I do understand that mother, that little girl that was 5 years old, got killed in front of her, in front of my eyes. And she said, you might as well kill me, because without the child, I don't want to live. And that SS took his gun and shot her right on the spot. But I can understand what she felt.
I was looking out the window, and they were putting all the children in those buses. And what I noticed is the buses didn't have any exhausts, because all of the exhaust gases were aimed directly back into the buses. And then I saw that they had brought back a woman with 2 little girls, and she was fighting those Germans tooth and nail. She just wouldn't let go of her 2 little girls. One must have been around 5, maybe one was about 3. And she wouldn't let go. And so the German stopped and they told her that she could keep one. And of course, and he thought it was a really big joke, that he could make her pick one out of 2. Now, how can a mother pick one child of the other? So what eventually she did was she went into the bus with the children together. And by the time these buses went to the same place where the graves were, most of them were dead. All of them were probably dead, because the exhaust gases is what, it's sort of like a gas chamber bus is what it was. It was a gas chamber on wheels.
Just the idea that the Germans are going to come in, it was very scary. The day the Germans marched in, I was in bed, in my parents' bed, listening to the radio. And over, the Ukrainians were announcing that they are going to meet the Germans with basketfuls of Jewish heads. And there were raids constantly. We were used to sweep streets, to shovel snow, to clean up rubble. Day by day, they were taking away people off the streets, particularly men, old people. It was constant fear. It was absolutely constant fear, because you never knew when somebody's going to come to the door and take you away.
I was hiding in a wardrobe that had double doors, and Germans came up. We couldn't see them, but we could hear, and started shooting in the rooms, into the closets, and wherever they could. So we figured we would be dead one way or the other, so we just got out of that wardrobe. It was my sister and myself, and painfully we sort of surrendered.
We were taken to the yard of a factory. I happen to remember that night also very well, because that was the last night I spent with my parents. And it was a strange experience, because you know that this is the end, and still that moment, that just that little, those few seconds or moments that you can hold their hands gives you a sense of feeling okay, you know, you are with them.
My father and my mother took me to the railroad station to say goodbye, and I can never forget that my mother had the forefeeling, and she cried bitterly. And as I said goodbye and said that I may never see you again, I told her, "Why do you cry?" She said, "I may not see you again." And I said, "Oh, Mother, I'm just going to report to the military. I will be back and I will be seeing you." But somehow a motherly instinct told her what she has to look forward to.
We had no idea what would be on the other end of the station. The only thing we ever were told, it's just a matter due to the war that labor is needed in Eastern Europe. Everything was totally camouflaged and not the slightest idea.
They hoarded us up into cattle wagons that had no bathroom facilities. They put a bucket. They did give us a loaf of bread, and they were keeping us in those wagons for days. Some people died there and could not survive, and there were no windows. It was just like cattle. That was my fantastic trip to Auschwitz from the ghetto.
In Cincinnati, the Vat Hatzalah, the Rescue Council of the Union of Orthodox Rabbis of the U.S. and Canada, under the leadership of Rabbi Eliezer Silver, urgently tried to arrange for the rescue of as many Eastern European Jews as possible. Rabbi Silver himself signed many affidavits while offering his own salary as collateral. In 1943, Rabbi Silver, along with 400 Orthodox rabbis from all over the United States, traveled to Washington to make a direct appeal to President Roosevelt to intercede on behalf of the Jews trapped in Nazi-occupied Europe. The appeal went unanswered. Meanwhile, as the fire of anti-Semitism raged throughout Nazi-occupied Europe, consuming untold innocent Jewish lives, there were many decent, humane civilians, like Irene Updike of Poland, who risked their lives to save their Jewish friends from certain death.
One day, as I was going to work a different way, as usually, I came face to face with a nightmare. I did see streets barricaded with barbed wire. The SS were yelling, screaming, shooting. They did not allow anyone to stay across the street. I was petrified, so I ran. There was an empty house right by the street. Probably was a Jewish home. Windows were broken. They were covered the window with the wood, and between the wood there were openings. Through the openings, I witnessed a nightmare that changed my life. The SS were beating, pushing, kicking. Mass of people from beyond barbed wire encampment. There were so many. Old men and women, pregnant women, people on crutches, people wounded, but most of all children, all sizes, all ages, little tiny ones, 2, 3, 4 years old. They were going to that alone. They were screaming, "Mama, Mama." I could not understand. I could not realize what was happening. I did even see young assessment pull the baby from little infant from mother's arm. He threw with the head to the ground. Another pull a baby and threw in the air and shot like a bird. I was standing there, bewildered, and asking, oh God, God, where are you? And you know, somehow in the morning, there was an answer in my soul, in my heart, that God give us free will to be good or bad. We cannot blame God. At that time, I asked God for forgiveness, and I asked for the opportunity to help, even if my life depends. And the opportunity arrived for me.
By creating an underground information network and by hiding Jews in the basement of a German major's villa, Irene, like other righteous rescuers, saved countless lives, even as the cattle cars rolled through Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe, bringing hundreds of thousands of Jews from the ghettos into forced labor camps and the death camps. The death camps, elaborate and ultra-efficient killing centers, were built by German scientists, doctors, and engineers to fulfill Hitler's dream of achieving a Europe cleansed of all Jews and Jewish life.
The transport arriving in Auschwitz, in Birkenau, the door opened, a lot of commotion, a lot of pushing, a lot of shoving, whips, rifle butts, dogs, and the first command we heard was women and children to the left, men to the right.
Screaming, yelling, these funny-looking people coming into the wagon, and they were the ones really who said that, give the babies to the older people. And then throwing our bundles that we had, prepared, the most necessary things, as they said we should have, throwing them down. It was clear that there was no intention for us to keep them. I was there with my grandmother. Otherwise, there weren't too many members of my family anymore because the young men especially were already taken in forced labor camp. My grandmother was 96 years old, and she always, I remember her telling my mom what to put on, how to dress her when she will be buried. She wanted to be buried with my grandfather naturally. And I just sometimes think I resent that she couldn't have that. I was very much attached to my father, very close to my father. I was the only girl in the family, and I was a sweet child, probably. My father really loved me. I loved him very much. And I remember my father kind of trying to protect his mother, who was a very tiny woman, from the crowds. And I, in turn, was trying very hard to keep somehow, not to lose him. So I kept focusing on him, and then my mother holds my hand on, and I think what saved her and what saved me was that my mother was a very bright woman. She just could see what was going on here. And I don't know, I say this retrospectively because I don't remember any clear-cut thought going through my head at the time, but I would think that with the firmness with which she held my hand, she gave me a message that I have to let go of my father and make sure that we hold on to each other. Because we found out very quickly that people who were alone in camp didn't make it, that you had to attach yourself to somebody. There had to be people who helped you survive, and that you kind of created a little family, little feeling for each other.
While we were working, the way we survived is somebody was sick and couldn't, the other four did what was supposed to do and covered up for the fifth one who couldn't. If you didn't have this kind of a connection, it was very, very hard. If you were just there alone, it was very hard to survive some of those conditions.
The most profound experience and my recollections was my arrival to Auschwitz and the chaos and the segregation of families and snatching away children from the mothers and the screams and taking us to a tremendous room, a shower room, and being disrobed, and the soldiers were mingling around, making fun at us, and they proceeded to shave off our hair totally. It was such a strange feeling and such a frightening, because we didn't know if the showers that we go are going to put us to death. After they showered us and gave us only ill-fitting one piece of clothing, totally barefoot and naked, just a dress, they put us in barracks that were designed for horses, and they proceeded giving us one bowl of soup for 6 inmates without any eating utensils. And that was so dehumanizing and so degrading that the first couple of days I just didn't eat because I didn't know how to cope with it. I was continuously dreaming and praying to be something else who I was. I didn't want to be a human being because I didn't feel like a human being. And I had all sorts of crazy dreams that I am a cat or I am a dog, anything else that was being treated with more humanity than we were treated in Auschwitz camp.
After the shower, we were chased across the street into another barrack, and there we were registered as prisoners, and the prison number was tattooed onto our left arm. And once we had that tattoo on our left arm, the Germans had us where they wanted us to be subhumans.
And we were very kind of hopeful that day. We thought that they gave us a number because they registered us, that, you know, there will be some place that somebody will know we exist. But that was not true. I mean, people could die and with gas just as well with numbers than without.
And with the physical abuse, mentally abuses starting right then and there, we were degraded like an animal, and any action or reaction we had from then on was like an animal, strictly instinctively. But going back then, there was nothing normal. Fear, I hope I find something to eat. That was the greatest fear. You did not think anything else. Food, food, food.
I saw a puddle that was left from the rain, and I just wanted to put my tongue into the puddle. And I remember the SS woman coming with the horsewhip. They always carried horsewhips with them. And how my mother looked at me, helped me realize that this can cost you your life.
Another memory that I have of my mother is that we had very little to eat. A piece of hard black bread, but every day she would take a small portion of it, a little piece of bread, put it aside and save it for Friday night. This was her Shabbat challah, and this is how we celebrated the Shabbat.
I remember that the thing I was always dreaming about, that if I ever get out of here, I will have a thick slice of bread with a piece of chocolate on it. And the idea, the fantasy of it, was kind of a little bit enlivening, as long as you could think that someday you'll have it, because it was possible with a fantasy for a while until you fell asleep, to still that gnawing feeling in your stomach.
Food was something like cooked grass, I think, because I remember the dirt crunching in my teeth, but I don't think we ate much. I mean, there was such anxiety.
I think the worst agony which we had to face once a month, when we had to appear naked in front of an SS non-commissioned officer, who with one look would decide if we would be still able to work. And if it would be his decision that we would not be able to work, we again would be sent through the chimney, being gassed and burnt.
The smell I remember. And I remember a conversation that my mother had with a cousin. And the two of them said, oh, you know, this smells that there must be burning human flesh. And I just couldn't believe that. I asked my mother, I said, is that what they're talking about? Is that possible? Oh, no, she said, these are some rumors.
We had to be counted. And since there were thousands and thousands of people, this procedure took quite a long time. At one point, I remember I fainted, so the SS woman who was in charge of counting us, she came and kicked me in the stomach, and she thought that I'm dead, but I had my sister with me. She was older, and somebody else, and they helped me to get up. If not, I would be just left as a dead.
And in 1943, the latter part of 1943, Leo Diamond and two other fellows tried to escape. And somebody snitched on him to the SS. And they found pepper on him. Pepper can be used to throw into somebody's eye to blind them. And we marched in from work one afternoon, and whenever we came back from work, we had to go first to the parade grounds and being counted, and all the time after that would be punishment being meted out to whatever punishment they wanted to mete out. And we saw 3 gallows, and all 3 were hanged. And we had to march past them to see him. And I know that 2 of my friends took Leo's brother to comfort him, and the brother had to look how his brother was hanged.
It wasn't a question whether you will survive or die, but the question was when you will die.
Fully aware of the atrocities being committed by the Nazis, a network of underground resistance units were organized in the camps, in the ghettos, and as partisan groups in the forests. Even with few resources, these courageous fighters managed to achieve small victories.
When I came to Warsaw, to those 2 cousins, we lived very close to the ghetto. We were hiding. Nobody knew that we are there except for the janitor who would bring us food. We never went out on the street. He talked to us and he said, well, you Jews, you really should fight against the Germans. It's your fight. And we decided, well, what are we going to lose? So we joined up with the underground, and our command post was in the old city of Warsaw. And of course, the minute we heard the first shots, we went there. We were actually defending the old city for about 3 weeks. And it was unbelievable. It was totally unbelievable because it was a small area. It was totally surrounded by the Germans. We were defending it through barricades. We were constantly being shot at, bombed. We were running out of everything. There was no food, there was no water. And eventually, our commandant said, we will have to give up. We will have to give that part of town up. And he said that the only way that we can come alive out of here is through the sewers. It was pretty bad. It was dark. It was, in some places, the sewage was up to here. In some places, the sewers were so low that you had to crouch. The Germans knew that there are people in the sewers, and periodically they would open a manhole and throw a grenade, so that when you were under a manhole, you literally walked over bodies.
Nobody wanted partisan, but that's where you could survive, you know. You know, you got together, you got ammunition, you got, and you was fighting the German, you know. That was the partisan, you know. They said to me, tonight, we go and blow it up, the railroad, you know. They know exactly how many ammunition go through and everything. And they say, you come with us. They give me a horse. And I make myself my own saddle. They blow it up that time, but there thousands of things, everything. A lot of got killed. After that, I got 4 rifles in me. I grabbed, you know, the soldier was laying, I took the rifle, and when I come back to them, they swore me in, and I become a partisan by them, you know.
So we finally came to the new city, and of course there was fighting going on there, and we were still in the new city for another month. But after several weeks being there, we decided, we were bombed, and my friend, the other young woman, was killed. I was wounded, and we decided that's enough. We would just try to survive.
Though the Jewish underground and the partisans fought valiantly, the Nazis succeeded in killing over 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million Jewish children. When American and Allied forces forced the German retreat in late 1944 and early 1945, the survivors of the labor and death camps were liberated at last.
The day I came into Orders was really something I've never forgotten. I'm, in a sense, glad that I took some pictures, because I don't think anybody can really understand what happened unless they see it.
When we walked around, we saw these furnaces, ovens, whatever you want to call them. It was just unbelievable. Those were actually human bodies being cremated inside these furnaces. I mean, there wasn't a furnace. There was a row of furnaces there, more than one.
I said at the time, people back home would never believe this, because I myself didn't know there was such a thing as a Holocaust camp or persecuted Jews or anything like that.
Our commanding officer got some of our people to go into town and round up German civilians. They made them take some of the bodies out of the house, or the so-called barracks or something that's there, and laid them out, and then had them bury them. And of course, everybody's horrified, and nobody knew anything about it, of course.
I was on the move, but I immediately wrote a letter while it was still fresh in my mind what I saw to my wife back home. I wrote, "Dear Mickey, I'm starting this letter along the road. I want to write it while certain things are fresh in my mind. I just saw a sight I never will forget. Do you remember the Stars and Stripes, where it showed a picture of an American prisoner lying in a bed, just skin and bones? Well, while we were advancing today, we saw what was left of approximately 4,000 beaten and starved Jewish, French, Polish prisoners, mostly all Jews. About 50 were living, their arms and legs no bigger than the legs of a baby. stomachs and cheeks sunk in. I saw hundreds lying on the ground in the prison, stripped naked and dead, no flesh on them. Flies had been working on them for 3 days. I saw hundreds in one building lying all over one another, the building and flesh still burning. I talked to one Jewish boy. He said that they hadn't had anything to eat for 5 days. The Germans just took off a couple hours earlier. The ones still living were so weak they couldn't hardly stand up. Some couldn't. They lay on the ground asking us for something to eat. I had a part of a pack of cigarettes in my pockets, and they really fought over them. They came running, yelling, and falling. They dropped to the ground, kissed our clothes. Some were bleeding profusely from German SS troopers beating them. I saw a strap with blood all over it. One Jew pointed out his father laying dead. He said the Germans shot all the sick and crippled ones with a pistol. One of the fellows took pictures of it, and he promised me one. I'll send it to you. I never believed a lot of these atrocity stories until I saw this, honey. Take my word for it, it's true. I was unable to eat from thinking about these poor guys. Their clothes were prison clothes, blue and white stripes. The Germans have surrendered in Italy. Russia has all of Berlin. America celebrates the war over again on May Day. That's a letter I wrote to my wife.
What are we going to do now? You know, there was just a total emptiness. I was the only person left from a very large family. There was absolutely nobody that I knew that survived, and nobody did.
Freedom wasn't what we imagined, because that was when we recognized that very few people made it. And then that's when one was more subject to depression and kind of a feeling of, so what?
And it's even worse when you're 12 years old and you turn around and there aren't any children. You're the only one left. I had nobody to play with. After the war, there was not one Jewish child left of my age. Nobody.
Right after we were liberated or survived or left the camps, we immediately looked forward, how to build a new life. And what permitted us, for those of us who could immediately find somebody, especially somebody from the family or somebody you knew from prior existence and could reconnect to your pre-camp life, that was very helpful in our rehabilitating ourselves and in going ahead with life.
By 1950, over 1,700 Eastern European Jews, those who fled their homes before the Holocaust and those who survived the flames, came to settle in Cincinnati with the help of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and the Jewish community of Cincinnati. This was to be their new home, for the past and the places that had once been their homes had been consumed in a fire of insanity.
I don't want people to think of us survivors as if we have been born in the Holocaust. We had lives, you know, rich Jewish lives with a lot of good family feelings and holidays, and you know, that was all part of it.
What we need to do is not forget, to remember and to know what happened, and to be able to detect prejudice at its mildest. If in Germany the first signs appeared on the park benches that dogs and Jews are not allowed, and people laughed at it and said, okay, so that's how it is. It is at that moment that one has to be able to do something about it, because if one doesn't, it'll definitely mushroom and it will definitely develop into something that cannot be halted.
Nobody's born with hate and prejudice. It's been taught. And that poison is going from one generation to the other real quick. And one has to wonder how much has the world learned? How much has changed and how much stayed the same? And it makes you very skeptical.
There are things that I never talk about, that I never mention, because they're too painful. And I think they're better buried. There are certain things that you cannot talk about, because if you do, you won't be able to stand it.
The horrors you forget. Losses you don't forget.
Very sad. Should never have happened. Hope it never happens again.
She never sat on Grandpa Eli's lap, and she still can't understand why.
I still feel very guilty. I feel guilty for surviving. I feel guilty that so many did not survive. And this has made a tremendous impact on my life.
Don't kid yourself, there are scars. There are scars physically, there are scars mentally, or both. What changed my life was probably getting married after the war and having a baby. And looking at a baby, then you do think, what kind of life would you want to live? And I think that changed me, but that doesn't mean there are no scars.
I felt that I have been robbed of many years of my life. At this point, 50 years later, I am very distressed that my own children never had any grandparents when they were being raised, and they never will know the feeling of having grandparents. And this we can never recapture.
Only the young people, they are the future leaders. They are the future. If they know that they have such a power, when they unite together, they can build better future for themselves and for for future generation. And I tell them so, stand up. You are so lucky. You go together to schools with children from all nationalities. Reach out to each other. Look at each other. Learn from each other.
I certainly hope that we in America will always, at least the center of America, of the American people, will always be aware that we can take nothing for granted, and we're not immune.
It cannot happen again. It's a possibility that I don't even want to think about.
Production assistance provided by This program was made possible in part by the Jacob and Jenny L. Lichter Fund of the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati and the Procter & Gamble Fund, with additional funding by Friends of the Combined Generations of the Holocaust of Greater Cincinnati.